on the zero that I pay you already. Thank you. Yay. All right, well, today, guys, we're here to talk about animals. And I know I do have some questions for you, and this is more for you guys to learn. So please be sure that you either pop them in the chat. I'll have one eyeball on one screen and one eyeball on your picture, so watching you guys. So we're going to talk about animals. So if you're not familiar with who we are, and I'm hoping that you can see the screen, and you should see one now that says it's Southwest Fair Housing Council. If you're not familiar with what we do and who we are a fair housing organization designed to help stop housing discrimination across all our counties in Arizona. What that means is it's fair housing enforcement and fair housing education. Please feel free to reach out as we go through and describe what these are. If you feel like you have questions about it or you're even not quite sure, because we do, again, have two departments in our office, one, education and outreach, that's me and my team. We typically travel and attend and come see you guys and do this training, but with the pandemic, it is remote for now. And then we have the enforcement department. And what they do is they hire people, and they call these people testers. And what they're going to do is train them and send them out to investigate allegations or just to objectively ascertain whether or not people's policies and procedures that are in place are discriminatory. Now, sometimes our targets are random and sometimes they're not. They're based on complaints. So I'll give you an example. There was this person in Yuma who didn't want to rent Hispanics, not her people. So when we got complaints, we sent out a white tester and asked for the rent of a 2-bedroom and a 1-bedroom. And of course, it was $450 and $550 for the Caucasian person. But for the Hispanic person, it would be double that. It would be $900 and $1,100 and nothing available. And when those testers come back, it isn't just what they had to say of the interaction. No testers have recorders in them. We are a one-person permission state. So our testers wear a recorder, and that recorder helps to identify the evidence and support the allegation if there is one in housing. The attorneys get to take care of all of that. So what we do, we help to ensure people have housing that is stable and long-term and not because of discrimination. Right? And we're going to talk about what those unprotected classes are. Now, I urge everyone, please, please, please know the 7 protected classes. So if I was to say, okay, there was an issue with disability, know that disability is one of the 7 protected classes, and a little bit more about it so that you can help someone if you hear of housing discrimination. In the slide that I've included this slide to itself. So if I have to ask you right now in the chat bar, there's 2 R's on the screen. What is one of the 2 R's that you put into the chat that I know you know one of the 7 protected classes that start with an R? I'll give you a second to get that typed in there. And we're looking for what is one or both of those R's. Now, if I was with you, I would be throwing prizes at you. Okay, Booz, Letitia, Krista, Patricia. You guys have it. It's good. Julia. Good. Race and religion. Good, those 3 R's. So make sure you know what they are. That is going to help you become the best advocate that you can be when you can see signs of discrimination. Now, we're here to talk about just animals, but I want you to know that fair housing does span a large range of topics. It's for not only rentals, but it's for buying a house. So right now, it seems like the push to buy the house is back coming, where people are going to get invested in getting people housed in their own homes for those that qualify. So when I do go buy a home, there are 3 additional things that they can't discriminate against me when I do buy a house, and that's based on age, source of income, and my marital status. you're working with potential home buyers, know that that's part of fair housing under fair lending is an important mode. Design and construction, appraisals, all of that is in a different class when we talk more about it, but just know it's more than just the rental world. Fair housing applies to both dwellings and common areas. Dwellings, pretty much the structure of where somebody lives. And then the common areas would be things like the mailboxes, the clubhouse, vacant land, vacant residential land, I should say, is also considered a dwelling. But common areas, sometimes people forget that is part of the request a person with disability can ask for should they need it under reasonable accommodation. Now, the slide talks about there is a clear difference between the Fair Housing Act and the Arizona Residential Landlord Tenant Act. The Residential Landlord Tenant Act talks about the rights and responsibilities of people when it comes to the tenant and landlord, but sometimes that can cross the line into fair housing. Unfortunately, with COVID-19, domestic violence is up. A lot of people are taking sexual advantage of others during this time. We would hope that it wouldn't happen, but there are too many cases coming forward where women have been sexually harassed and said, hey, I know you lost your job and you can't afford the rent, but if you service me each month, we'll consider that as a partial payment. Okay? And if you didn't know already, sex and housing is unlawful. Okay? But just know that that can cross the line. If a person calls me and says, hey, he won't fix my cool, can't pay my rent, and he's asking for sex, that crosses the line landlord-tenant into fair housing. Now, most commonly, when people think of discrimination, they think of intentional discrimination or purposely treating someone differently based on one of the 7 protected classes we talked about. However, in certain instances, it is possible for even unintentional discrimination to be considered unlawful. Let's put that into an example. I want my adults to have some quiet time in pool once a month, and the tenants all have agreed. They put this request in writing, and they decided that on the third Thursday, from 6 to 8, that would be the adult time, because the kids get it all the other time. So that would be the adult swim only from 6 to 8 on the third Thursday. Now, 55 or 62 property, meaning that I have some wiser folks that congregate in an area of properties known as 55 or 62. I'm not one of those, but can I do this? I mean, the Landlord Tenant Act says I have to give a 30-day notice when I change the rules, so I did. But can I make the pool area for an adult swim only once a month? I mean, once a month from 6 to 8. Can I do that, or am I in violation of fair housing? Chat what you think the answer might be. So all the tenants have given me something in writing that says, I want 6 to 8, third Thursday. What, that's not a lot. Put up a sign. I'll give all the tenants a notice. I'll give the new tenants a notice when they move in, so they know that it's an adult swim only. And I see a couple people. No violation. Yes. No. Answer is no. Reason we can't. Familial status. 1 of 7 protected classes. And I'd say familial status is the 3rd list of people not understanding and having discrimination against kids. So the answer is no, but that would be unintentional discrimination because you can't say kids cannot swim. It would have to be lap swim only, maybe, because then that's not discrimination. Okay, but I wanted to give you an idea of unintentional. Person didn't know, but they ended up having to come to the table for $35,000 for that mistake. Okay. So here's the 7 protected classes. Briefly know that in Tucson, which I know we don't have anyone in Pima County right here today except for me, there are, Patty, that's true. That's true. Here, let me smack myself for you. Now you know.
Don't forget about me.
No, I was thinking you were in Maricopa for some reason. But in Tucson, there's 5 additional protected characteristics. So know what those 5 are. And if you don't have this poster already posted, you as an organization have a responsibility to have this posted in a conspicuous place. Because look at the center line, the 3rd bullet, if you will, or the 3rd square, employers saying 1 to 100. So you don't necessarily be in the market, but if you're in the city, you need to have that up. And all it says is we don't discriminate. And we have added, with the federal 7, we have added ancestry, gender identity, marital status, age, and sexual orientation. Those 5 have been added. So in Tucson, you've got 12 protections. In Maricopa, Sedona, Sedona, Mesa, Phoenix, they all have a local statute that says no discrimination based on gender identity. That means how I dress, has nothing to do with my sexual orientation. It's just how I dress, and sexual orientation. So in your areas, I know you guys, but like someone who's here from Mojave, Mojave doesn't have any local protections for sexual orientation. I'm not saying they should go and discriminate. We'd find a way around it, but they can't do it. All right. That gives you a little taste of fair housing. Know that we have more classes. And if there's a topic that you want to have a class on, let Linda know at the end, because that's what we're all about, is making sure that you get the education you need to do your job as best as you can and be an advocate for those that can't help themselves or don't know the information. All right. Are we good so far? Okay, I know that was a quick overview. Disability and fair housing. The thing you need to know about 2020 guidance is the fact that it is getting closer to the way I teach it to help people understand about animals and housing. But it still has a little ways to go. So I'm going to teach you my way, and then I'm going to show you what their way is. But this came across, this new guidance in 128, because disability-related complaints are about 60% of the calls, not only in our office, but in HUD's office. So they tried to come out with a bit more of a definition regarding fair housing and animals. But I'm going to give you the basics, and then we're going to go over their guidance. This is the law, and I have stated where you could find the statute in the law behind each of them. So if you look at the first definition that says it's a physical, sensory, mental condition that substantially limits one or more major life functions, that statute, if you can't sleep at night, just go look up that statute. You're going to go right to sleep, I promise. I've tried it, it works. So there are 3 definitions of a person and what they can be defined as disabled. The first one I see most often on the docket, meaning when people get in trouble either from our enforcement team and it goes to the attorneys, or they get in trouble from HUD or the Department of Justice, they always have to come to the table with money. They usually get monitored anywhere from 1 to 5 years, and then they have to take classes. And I do teach some of those classes. So on the docket, usually I see number 1 as the most common complaint is when someone has a physical, sensory, or mental condition that limits one or more major life functions, then they can be considered as disabled. Now, major life functions, I'll use myself. I can't walk, talk, sleep, dress, think until I get caffeine in the morning. All those things are major life functions. I have to say that jokes don't travel as well over remotely as they do in person. But
No, they don't.
They don't. I gotta try. That's just the comic in me. I gotta try. So if you guys haven't been to a live classroom, you'll know I throw prizes at you when you're wrong and tell bad jokes there too. Okay. Biggest thing I see in violation is people sometimes will, for whatever belief, I don't know why, haven't figured that part out, but they'll believe if they can't see the disability on you, then you don't have one. So a housing provider will say, hey, you don't look disabled. Why do you need that animal? You don't need it. And so I encourage them. Housing providers are not to determine on the face of unseen disabilities what a person may need. Their duty under the law is respond when someone does ask for reasonable accommodation. But I can tell you another mistake or flaw out there is most people don't know how to ask for reasonable accommodation. So that's in this training as well. Because if you can ask properly and only give what is required to give, it will help the process much easier when someone does face a denial based on a reasonable accommodation. When a person has a disability, they can have two things. They can have a modification to the structure, That's a reasonable modification. And they can ask for accommodation. Now, a modification, again, change to the structure, pretty straightforward. The only time I've seen issue with that is like HOAs may have issues, and we still beat them on the head. But it's pretty much a change to the structure. When we talk about accommodation, this is where most people don't realize how it is all put together. So we're going to work on that a little bit. But remember, modification, a change to the structure, accommodation, a change to their policies and procedures. Okay. There are three key laws relating to disability and discrimination. The first one, the Fair Housing Act, that applies to pretty much all properties. It wouldn't apply to a transient shelter, like if I took my stuff with me each night, then that shelter most likely isn't subject to fair housing, but it would be subject to ADA because of the facility. The other one is Section 504. If you're working with federally funded properties, Section 504 says that they too will pay for any modifications inside in their program. They will pay for any modifications that are needed. But if it is not a federally funded program and your advocates are renting, then the tenant must pay for any modifications. Then we have the Americans with Disabilities Act. The big misnomer here is the ADA definition of a service animal is not enforced in fair housing. I want to say that one more time, because some people think the definition of the ADA and the rules of the ADA service animal apply to housing, and they do not. They are not enforced in housing. The ADA says when you're in the public, you have to have a dog and a mid-sized horse, and we'll cover that a little bit more when I go through the steps that HUD has laid out. All right, Steve showed you that. A lot of times the question becomes, do housing providers have to have a formal procedure in order to get an accommodation or modification? And the answer is no. They don't have to have a procedure, but you as an advocate, if you can think of this as what they need to ask for and how they need to ask for it, then it's just going to follow the business process for them to respond. So they don't have to have a formal policy. So if I go in and say, hey, what's your formal policy when it comes to animals, so I know if I can have reasonable accommodation, they may not give it to you. They may not have it. But I encourage housing providers, if you don't have one, if you are a housing provider on this call and you don't have a process in writing, please do so, okay? Because it will help you if allegations are thrown out there. When the people ask for things, a lot of the times when the calls that I get, they will say, hey, I told them that this puppy is my service dog, and my question to them is, have they put it in writing? Most of the time what they tell me is no. So if you're helping as an advocate to get an animal passed as a reasonable accommodation, put it in writing, okay? I'm going to tell you the things that will, the pieces of the stuff that you need to put in writing for the documentation, because along with that, the question always comes, do I have to put it in writing? Can they really ask me for that? I'm a person of the table. They can't ask me what my medical conditions are. And there's a lot to unpack in that. So here's an easy way to unpack it. When someone can ask for documentation, they can only ask if one of two things. Can you see the disability? Yes or no. And can you see the connection of the request to the disability? Yes or no. I'm a person, I have a cat. It helps me with my depression. Can you see my disability? No. Can you see how that's connected to my depression? No. So then they can ask. But this is where housing providers don't know how to ask. And this is where most of the time I find that you have to be the advocate to teach them and only give them what you should under the law. So verify disability if the disability is not fully apparent, meaning you can't see it, and or the connection of the request to the disability isn't visible, then they can ask. And they can only ask for two things. They can ask for the nature of the disability, and they can ask for the connection if they can't see one or the other. So I'm a person, I have depression. I know it's a clinical diagnosis, but I'm using it as the nature of my disability. And my cat, Fluffy, helps me when I get into these moods. That is the only information that you have to give to a housing provider in order to get someone approved for a reasonable accommodation. If you can talk to the nature of the disability and you can talk to the connection. Now, this statement that I put on here is something that I have. It's not mandatory. It's something that I'm trying to help housing providers to make it just clear. So you as an advocate, if you have a tenant come to you or anyone come to you and say they ask me for documentation, can they do that? Yes, they can. But what I'm asking them to consider is to only ask this way, because it's how they ask and what they ask for that's getting them into trouble. So they can ask something from a healthcare provider, which states the nature of the disability and how this request is committed. Sounds simple, doesn't it? If it was so simple, though, we still have issues if people don't understand to just have this blind process. Somebody asks, they ask for the they can't see it. They ask for the nature and the connection. They provide it, and then there's approval. Hopefully, it should go that easy, but for some reason, we don't make it that easy. All right.
Cheri, there's a question in the chat that you may want to address from Selena. She has a specific situation.
I work at a particular apartment complex, and on that, if they have pets, yes or no. It's good. The person is denied even with provided procedures to my, no, is not. Okay, so you can ask on the application, do you have any pets? Yes or no. I would not suggest you ask if you have any disabilities, yes or no, because I wouldn't recommend that as a best practice. Remember, I'm not an attorney too. I didn't give you the disclosure. I'm not an attorney. I'm just a practitioner in this field for 14 years. And I base my education, what I see come through the cases, people mistake. So this is not an attorney advice, but the person is denied even with provided documentation. If you're doing that, that is unlawful. That is illegal.
See, that's what I thought. I have previously housed a person at this particular complex, and they've asked, okay, yes, I have a pet, but I have a service animal with supporting documents stating it's not just a therapy, it's a service animal. And they're like, no, we can't. Well, we have to deny you at this time.
Okay, so a couple of things. I don't know who that was. You're more than welcome to send me a note, and I will offer free class. You're not working for these people now, right? Or you are?
I still work with them, but I don't take anybody that has pets. Okay.
Well, then this is an opportunity of two things. One, my goal is to educate before we have to persecute or prosecute, right? If I can educate and they truly are like us that really don't want to discriminate, they just don't know, then that's an opportunity to unfold. The second thing is the big thing that gets thought of, and it's a slide we'll talk about, is that people don't realize if you can separate animals for disabilities, I don't care what you call them, therapeutic, service, comfort. I used to have a slide with 9 different names, right? It doesn't matter what you call it. But if you can put it in your brain that any animal for a person with a disability is a qualified animal.
Okay.
Just take the term for right now because we're going to talk about it. But any animal for a person with a disability is a qualified animal. So we're going to treat them differently than pets because everything else is a pet, right? Would you agree?
Right.
Okay. So this is one way I think it's going to help people understand, the ones that don't want to discriminate, that want to do the right thing. This is going to help them put that into place because honestly, in my years in mortgage industry before I came here, I used to do mortgages as a branch manager. I didn't know fair housing. I didn't know fair lending. So nobody goes out and teaches this stuff. So I try to assume that everybody wants to do the right. After that, I bonk them in the head. So The key here, the first key is in anybody's business is if you can realize when someone comes to you with a request for a disability, this is the first big part, and that is if you can't see it, you can't see the connection, you can't see the disability, you have to go to the next step too, and that's to ask. Something from the healthcare provider states the nature of the disability and how this request is connected, because that tells you the two things. And we don't have to get into, you know, look disabled, well, you didn't have it yesterday, well, I mean, there's all kinds of excuses out there, but this will keep it clean. Now, when we talk about, you see /professional, the reason that /professional is on there is because HUD has decided in this guidance to use the word healthcare professional. That does a disservice in my point to go back and stress that. When I talk to people and I ask, okay, they say, yeah, we got to ask them to get something from their doctor. Well, does it have to come from a doctor?
No.
Yeah, and the answer is right. It's no. I do see the question, and I will address that in just a second. So you see that on there, but I like the term healthcare provider because this is not the only list, but this is a list of healthcare providers. People who work in DES as support coordinators, they're healthcare providers. This does not violate any HIPAA when you talk about the nature of the disability and how the request is connected. And if you guys are interested in handouts, I do have the HUD DOJ, which is statements like 6-10 pages, but it talks to this, and you can show people this that says, hey, it does not have to be a doctor, because this is another big mistake I see in a lot of the cases, is the housing provider is holding out for two things. One, it has to be from a doctor, then they want to call the doctor and verify. I don't know why, that seems like a lot of work. Or the law just says if they provide it to you, you have to either determine that it's reasonable and you have to respond. But if they want to do all these extra things, they just put themselves at risk. But in the end, all a person has to do is submit the nature of the disability and explain how the request is connected. If a reliable third party who's in the position to know can validate that, and then it has to be requested, or it has to be approved if reasonable. Okay. There are two ways a person can be denied a reasonable accommodation.
Before you go on, just wanted to make sure that you are able to address if an animal ends up being dangerous and hurts another client.
Okay, who is
responsible?
Good job, good job. And interrupt me anytime. When an animal ends up being dangerous, and you'd have to define what dangerous is, because I have people who suppose that they look at this animal and they think it might attack them. That doesn't fly, whether you think they are. So if the dangerous is proven, though, however, let's say that my service animal is a dog and he bites another tenant who was just walking by and he got away from me and he bit him, then that's called a direct threat. And the direct threat can be removed for health and safety reasons within 24 to 48 hours. So if I had a dog and I would have to look at the situation where kids taunting it, I don't know, whatever the situation is, create harm, then it's a health and safety risk, just like it would be if a pet bit somebody. When it comes to health and safety, all animals have to follow the health and safety rules. That is a given, and as it should be. But what happens that housing providers and people forget is qualified animals don't always follow pet rules. That's why they're different. Because qualified animals have their set of rules, pets have their set of rules, right? So if you can get those two early. So direct threat, whether it's a person or an animal, if a person, not that a person would come around and bite me, but if a person is a direct threat to me, they can take action on that as to housing providers can give notices for health safety violations. Does that help? Okay. Let's see. Two ways. Okay, so let me give you a scenario. You're my housing provider. I'm agoraphobic. I can't leave the house. I want you to go shopping for me on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and I'll give you the money because I can't leave the house, and my doctor has sent you a notice, in this case it is a doctor, that I'm agoraphobic and I can't leave the house. What would you say as the housing provider? Heck, I can't leave the house. And I need you to go shopping for me because you don't have anything to do. You're at home. Unreasonable. No. That's what I see so far. And yes, if you could define why it's unreasonable. So I'm going to give you the two ways that the law looks at when you can deny someone. And you're right, that was unreasonable. That was a fundamental alteration of my business. That's the one of the two ways that it can be denied. So I'm not in the business to go shopping for people. I would have to get a special car if I think this through before I just say, heck no. If I think this through, I'd have to get a special car, pay someone to special wages to go shopping. And I am not in the business as a housing provider to go shopping. So that would be a fundamental alteration. So I could say no, but just remember at any no, there should be some interactive conversation and say, hey, I'm going to say no to that, but you've got Walmart.com, Target, Safeway, you name them, they can all deliver. So I'm going to say no to your request, and then I'm going to make some suggestions, and I'm going to document that to say that here's no, but this is what they call the interactive process. I come up with some solutions, whether I said no or not. If I was the one that said, I don't care, I want you to go, and I'm going to call Cheri at Fair Housing, we would back you up because it's a fundamental alteration of your business. The other one is if it's too expensive. Let's say that I have a 2-story and I want a elevator stuck in there. That would be too expensive and couldn't be done even if the permit would require it. So there are two reasons, remember, outside the scope of business, and it has to be huge to be a financial burden. Just want to make sure, let's another scenario here. I am blind. I come and smack you with my white stick, and if you're not sure, I'll smack you again. But I tell you that I want a peephole. Can I have my peephole? So I'm blind. I come in. Give you the request. Says I'm blind. I want a peephole. Can I have one? Would you guys grant me one?
Yes.
Oh, that's a nice person. Is it Karen? If you're talking to me, you're muted. I see the motion, so I'm not quite sure. There you go.
I'm so sorry. I think that if I would do it, because what if that legally blind person can still see light and shadow? And by having a peephole, they can tell if somebody is there.
Mm-hmm. But would I have to do it legally by law?
Yes.
Because
they, I mean, I think that's a reasonable request. Even though they're legally blind, they can still see.
So what if they can't see? What do they need a peephole for?
They're not 100% in sight. They can
Good
still
job.
see, but not 100%.
Good job. Good job. So exactly that is that this person doesn't have to be 100% blind to be blind, as we all know, right? Take my glasses off. Who knows where I end up? Somebody else's house. But the whole thing is that it's reasonable. You can't necessarily see the connection of blindness to the peephole. When he says, hey, my physician says I'm suffering from anxiety because I'm losing my sight. It is going away, and I want the peephole to see while I still can, then it's reasonable, right? What about March? She suffers from chemical sensitivity disorder, and her request is to have you survey all tenants in the building during the time of day, and because what she wants to find out is when will the chemicals be used. so that she can plan to be away from home. So my request is that you go out to everyone, you ask them what they're cleaning, what they're using, you make a list, and you give it to me on a weekly basis so that I can make accommodations elsewhere. What do you think? Would it be hard for my staff to run out and get all these, you know, weekly? End up being a burden for me. So what I would have to do as the housing provider, or you would have to do as a housing provider, is say we can't do that, but maybe we can look into the greener spray as we go around to help your chemical sensitivity, and then give you a list of when we do that. But the list of when everybody cleans, that's not reasonable. All right, a few more examples. We got the people. Oh, did you guys know hoarding is a disability?
Mm-hmm.
So if you have someone who is a hoarder, we can ask for an extension of the eviction while processes are put into place for that hoarder to get things taken care of. Another scenario, I am a disabled vet. I've been living with you for 5 years. My rent is due on the 1st and it's late on the 5th. I come to you and say, you know, I've been paying on time every time, but now I can't pay. It's the 11th. So I want to pay you on the 12th, and I want you to waive the fees now and forevermore. So I've been living with you 5 years, paying on time every year, but now I can't pay on time, and I want you to waive the late fees now and forevermore and let me pay you on the 12th. Let's see, we have a limited belongings policy at our emergency family shelter. Is that not legal? Okay. So I will talk to your question about the limited belongings, but I want to give answers. So because this I found is very helpful, if you know as advocates that yes, they would have to give me a reasonable accommodation. Because am I disabled? Yes, I'm a disabled vet. Is asking to get paid on reasonable? Yes, it's reasonable. I would prorate my rent from the 1st to the 11th. And then the 12th, I just pay, and I should still get the 5-day grace period. So then if I didn't pay by the 17th, then maybe assess me late fees, right? It's treating me the same, but we're just shifting the date of the policy, of the payment rent. So this would save this person, which is the case, would save this person all these late fees, which end up making them homeless because they can't keep up with it just by asking for a reasonable accommodation. Right? That is not a financial burden for the housing provider to let pay 10 days later. I'm trying to think of other examples so that you can see it applied in today's world. The biggest thing coming up that I want to share with you we've been in the news, maybe you've seen it, is that lately there's been a lot of people deaf and hard of hearing. They weren't giving their accommodation for translate. And so there was cases for Arizona, Denver, Idaho, Texas, Miami, and more regarding that when they would ask if they could have a translator, not only were they given different answers by different people, which let me tell you right now, testing for our testers, what they're looking for, it shouldn't be a secret, but I can tell you it's patterns and practices. So if I go into one of these facilities and ask for a translator and I get 3 or 4 different other people with different messages, that is clearly patterns and practices are not consistent. And that is what's happened here, is that they not only didn't provide them. So?
I'm hearing impaired, so you need to test.
Oh, okay. If anyone wants to become a tester, you just go to our website and sign up to become a tester. But it's really part-time, and they're looking for all kinds of people. But for those that have the disabilities, they can understand the obstacles they have to overcome. And sometimes it's the obstacles that you have to overcome. If I'm going to talk medical terminology with you, I don't want to have to write it down on a board, right? Which is what they were having these people do. If I ask for an interpreter, I should get that interpreter. Right? If there's ever a question of cost, we'll then do that on a case-by-case basis. But don't ever deny a reasonable accommodation unless you're sure it fits one or two of those things. It changed the nature of your business. A fundamental alteration is what they call it. Or financial burden is another easy one, just to put it. Okay. So just know that this is something deaf and hard of hearing coming up more and more in the news. I like to give samples. This is an example of what someone can do and how easy it can be. Again, if you want the slide bank, it's available for you. This is just one easy example. If you need help getting a reasonable accommodation letter for someone, just reach out, because that's what we're here for, is to help you. All right, animals, the big kahuna here.
Cheri, before you jump into the animals section, do you want to address the limited belongings policy?
Oh, yes, thank you, thank you. Can you tell me more about limited belongings? Like I can only have a shirt and pants, that kind of limited belongings, or you won't let me leave behind certain things? Any thoughts on limited belongings? Does that mean, let's see, emergency family shelter, that's emergency family shelter, so I don't know if it's, you kick them out and then let them in. I would have to know more.
Kira, you can either take yourself off mute if you want to give a little more context, or you could type it into chat and we can come back to that once you provide a little more information that will help Cheri answer your question.
Okay. Great. All right. Qualified animals. Now you can see it on the screen. This is the concept. Any animal for a person with a disability, qualified animal. Now remember, qualified animal is not a HUD term. It's not an official term. Because if you can distinguish these two and keep these two in your brain, you're going to be far better off than most out there that this still is elusive for some reason. So two categories. If it's a person with a disability, they have a qualified animal. If it's a person who doesn't have any disability, it's a pet. And you can do anything that's lawful for pet rules that you want. I can say no pets. I can say say a 50-pound pet. I can say anything lawful that I want regarding pets, but I cannot say anything lawful that I want for qualified animals. And that's different. Put that into practice. A couple of main things that I see the housing providers, I guess there's sometimes they don't like these animals for whatever reason. They don't like animals, but this is one thing they need to know as well. As you see, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 animals on your screen. There are 4 people in my household. Each animal, it belongs to a person as a qualified animal. The property that I live in also has a 1 pet policy. So in addition to my 4 qualified animals, I can have my 1 pet as well, or however many pets that they have distinguished as allowable pets. If they have 2 pets, I could have 2 pets and 4 each person, because each one of those qualified animals, if you think about it, is a tool for that person. It is not a pet. They do something different. That's why we're going to separate them. So I have 4 qualified animals on my screen and 1 pet, because that's the amount that they are allowing in pets. So it's good to know that qualified animals do not count in the pet rules. Okay. If I did have a call, a woman had 12 chickens. They were all her service animals. So instead of judging, I just told her to go to her healthcare provider, get something named for each chicken, because each chicken has to perform a different duty, right? I can have one for anxiety, one for depression, one for, I don't know, I don't have a lot of stuff wrong with me. Hypertension, I don't even know what that is. But anyway, those things, I could have one for each one, but each one, and that's where each one would have to perform a different function. And that's how you get around people having 12 dogs and they're all my service dogs, is they must, each one must serve a different function. There are people out there that know the fair housing rules that try to use the rules for other than attended. So if I told you I had 12 dogs, we need 12 dogs for one person, unless it's really something they can point out. They don't each have 12 service dogs. Okay. So remember, the quantity is not based on qualified animals, but quantity can be restricted for pets. And that's something some people get mixed up. All right. Here's HUD process. Now remember, qualified animals, you can see on the left there, takes care of the definition of all these. But this is what HUD's new guidelines have said. They said when you get a person in front of you that's asking for a reasonable accommodation in housing, then we want you to go through this 3-step process. We want you to look at the animal. Is the animal a service animal as defined under the ADA? Remember, ADA enforcement is not in housing. They only enforce in public. So if I was to go to Target, Target can say, hey, is that a dog or a mid-sized horse? Because that's what is defined as a service animal. And if it is a dog or a mid-sized horse for public, it must be specifically trained to perform a task. A task. That's why emotional support animals don't work in Target or Costco, is because they don't perform a task. So that it has to be a dog, mid-sized horse, and has to perform a task. If your animal in public is unruly or not housebroken, then they can ask it to leave. There are only 2 questions they can ask you in public. So if you're getting more than these 2 questions, which I've been getting feedback, and that's kind of disturbing to me, is if you have an animal, and it's a dog or mid-sized horse, and it's trained, then they can only ask you, is this animal required because of a disability, and what tasks does it perform? So if you're getting more than that, complain to management. So we've looked at HUD's rule, and it said look to see if it's an ADA-defined animal. Well, it's not a dog, it's not a mid-sized horse. I can't see, let's say it's my monkey. This is my monkey. It's one of those organ-turning monkeys. Can you imagine one of those monkeys? It's one of those that you see. Okay, so not a dog, it's not a mid-sized horse, and obviously it doesn't have a function. So then they say, okay, now I want you to go to step 2, and step 2 says, well, if it's not a trained mid-sized horse, then it must be a supportive or assistive animal. And that means it doesn't have to have specific training, but it does now have to fall in this little category called cat, fish, bird, hamster. I call them any pocket pets. Any pocket pets, not specifically trained. Those 2 now can be what we're calling qualified animals, but they're calling it a little bit different. So now my monkey isn't one of those. So what is my monkey? Well, the 3rd step is it's a unique animal. So I would have to show how this unique animal helps me. For example, this capuchin monkey has dexterity. I have an allergy to dogs. He has a dexterity where he can open up pill bottles and flip on light switches. I've just taught him to go get the beer, but he drinks it before he brings it back to me. So I haven't gotten that well trained yet. But the capuchin monkey, they can do all kinds of things because they have the dexterity. So then the housing provider would have to allow it, because even if it wasn't a service animal, it wasn't a dog or a mid-sized horse specifically trained to perform a task, it wasn't a pocket pet that doesn't have to be trained but has to perform some kind of function, then it must be this unique thing because it doesn't fall in the other categories, and you still have to let me have it because I've given something from my healthcare provider, which states the nature of the disability and how the request is connected. So you can see the qualified animal is just, for me, an easier concept. If it's for a person with a disability, then no, you're going to treat it differently.
Cheri?
Yes.
We have more information on limited belongings policy, so we can circle back to that later. But here's a question about animals. I have had a client who had 6 dogs she claimed were for different conditions, but turned in the same letter 6 times from an urgent care. Would that be considered proper documentation?
In my opinion, and again, I'm not either tenant or housing provider pro, I am people pro. But what I would say is you're missing information. That's why it's so critical to tell people, if I'm the housing provider, that's why it is so critical to say, I need something from a healthcare provider. Okay, what's missing here is there's the healthcare provider, but it's stating the nature of the disability and how each one serves a different function. So, for example, and then pick your battle, but the client has 6 dogs. Let me ask you, if the 6 dogs came on and there was no trouble, then no issue, right? But I would still let her know. I didn't see the letter, but if the letter says, Harry helps me with depression, Sally helps me with anxiety, that's what you want to tell people. I'm trying to teach people to get that documentation because they come to our office, that's exactly what enforcement is going to tell them. But it is something where you have to use, it's like they bring into, is it a shelter, urgent care? So like if they're calling you, if you're coming into urgent care, I don't know about the housing situation, how you can deal with the 6 dogs. Like, but if it was a rental and someone came to me and said, I had 6 dogs, and you have time to say, I need something from a healthcare provider, which states the nature of the disability, how this request is connected, and the function for each animal, because each animal must serve a different function.
Cheri, my
Yes.
dad's 100% wolf saved his life, and the emergency crews came out and they were digging dirt at every orifice of his body because the dog was howling and digging a hole at the same time because he was having a heart attack.
Oh.
And that's just a little story that I have, but
I love it.
I have wolf dogs, so I'm also very passionate about this topic and unique dog animals or whatever. So again, if you ever need a tester.
Okay, all right, awesome. So I have a client with 6 dogs she claimed for, okay, and I don't know if you can go back and ask her, but just tell her if the dog's unruly that you need something that shows that each dog serves a different function. And that's not unreasonable. Now, where it's all going to play out is when it gets to the attorney. So if, let's say that either one of you said no and either one of you complained, they would look at all the pieces on a case-by-case basis. And that's another strong point that I would ask everyone to do, is not lump them into one category, but you got to listen to the details, because that's where the difference comes in. If you look at something and it didn't give you the nature, it didn't tell you how, it didn't tell you what it was connected, then that's when you have the knowledge now to say, hey, I need to get this, I just need to know how they're connected. And if, let's say that I have a lady who has a cat and now she has a comfort cat because her other cat's getting ready to kick the butt and it's in training, and it's not causing issue, then I would just go with the one no. But so you kind of have to use that judgment. If these dogs are disruptive, maybe not concentrate on the no, but concentrate on the rules that say these dogs can't be disruptive. I don't care if there's disabled for disabilities or not, they still can't be unruly. They can't be unsafe, because that is the basics of the rule. So I'm hoping, Caitlin, that helps. If you give each person a container to put their thing in, I don't know why that action wouldn't be lawful. The question was, can you do it, I believe. Oh, Julia, I don't have a microphone right now, but we have a similar policy at transition shelter. People allow long and swings and containers.
That's on limited belongings policy, so I'm going to save all those for
okay.
after
All right.
the animal section, and we'll come back to that.
Gotcha. All right. Housing providers, this is my call out to typically what I hear from the housing providers, or what they get sick of is just having maintenance come by and they find out that an animal lives there, that the tenant did not know he could advocate for himself or herself to ask for reasonable accommodations, and they find this animal, then they have to give them a 10-day notice to cure because they're not have an animal, or pay the fee, and then we get into this back and forth because each party doesn't know how to ask for what they need. So if you're an advocate for clients, members, whomever you serve, peeps, let's say, be sure that they request what they need for reasonable accommodations. And again, that helps to build the partnership, a rental partnership, I should say, when they just come out and ask for it. To be ready to prepare and get something from their healthcare provider that can show that documentation. This guidance also does address the effect of internet. Of course, this was all written before the pandemic. HUD does realize that there are people, and I guess where it comes out, which is kind of funny, where you have one complex and they must all go to the same doctor online because all the letters that the housing provider gets is from the same doctor. So we do know that there are some unlawful practices, like you can see the little ad I found, the $89 emotional support animal you can get in 10 minutes. Is that possible? I don't know. But what I'm going to do is this. As housing providers, I wouldn't challenge so much the letters, is ask for what you need. If you need those two things, the nature and the connection, ask for it. If it's not there and you really can't see it, then ask for it because the law says you can. But to be a detective and say, this letter I'm sure is not, legit, and to become that kind of investigator, please don't do that. It never works out. Because even if that letter isn't sufficient, there can be another letter after that that is sufficient, and then you've just violated fair housing because of your suspicion. So please don't do that. They do recognize it, but they're asking you is to make sure that you take it, don't become the investigator, just get the information that you need and let the karma come back somewhere else if they really are lying or they really did give you something that was fraudulent. But if they put you on notice to the nature, put you on notice to the connection, best practice is to accept it and just give them the rules. Give them the rules that all animals must follow. And we're going to talk about that just a little more about the rules and how I think they should look. But the key here to help people, to prevent people from getting evicted, which is what my goal was to help with the eviction issues, was to know the difference between the qualified animals, what you can do with them, what the rules are, and how they differ from pets. People out there trying to use the rules of fair housing, just not to have to pay the deposit. Pay your deposit. Be responsible. Don't try to use this law for them. It's meant for those with disabilities and animals. Don't try to use that just because you don't want to pay the pet deposit. We all have to do our part. So I usually ask, I should say, qualified animals are like tools. They're not pets. You think about them like a wheelchair, a fur with the fur and tail. That helps to make sure that they can be anywhere, they can be anyone, but the key is they are part of for a person with a disability. Okay, not any questions. This is what I see that's out there if you're working with tenants, make sure that they know what their pet policy is. Sometimes the housing provider isn't very clear about that. So what I'm everybody to do is list the pet policies. I allow one pet, it has to be 50 pounds, it has to be on a peak leash, and it can only be a iguana, I guess one of those lizards, right? That's my pet policies. All of those rules, though, they don't apply to qualified animals. I'm not going to pay the pet deposit. I'm not going to be limited to the quantity. I'm not going to be limited to the type. But where those rules come together is all the health and safety, right? And that's where the second part of this says create rules that have all the health and safety in them because it applies to all animals. They do have to be responsible if the animal poops out there. They are responsible if the animal bites. That's health and safety. They do have to wear a leash. They do have to have inoculations. Whatever those health and safety rules are, they apply to all animals, whether qualified or not. It's the pet rules, that won't qualify, or that don't apply, I should say, sorry. When we talk about restricted breed, this is where I would encourage you, if you get someone that says, no, we have insurance, be sure that they send the request to the insurance company as well. Reason for that is we did have an insurance company that, hey, we don't like Rottweilers and we're not going to give you the accommodation of the request because this animal is for your disability, and they were found culpable of $40,000, right? So they had to redo their rules. They will take reasonable accommodation requests. So if you get someone that says no because of insurance reasons, I would still ask that they send that request off to their insurance and get a written response. Basically about reasonable accommodations and a reasonable modifications is, if you get them, if you're in the business to get them, take a breath, right? Let's take the personality out of it, review and evaluate what is that they're asking for. What is it that they need, and can you do that? Is it reasonable? And if not, what can we do to help solve that problem? Because, for example, I have extreme bouts of arthritis. I can't make that trash can live. You have to throw it up and, get my trash in. Maintenance tells me that kids can't either. They put the trash all around. So I'm asking for a reasonable accommodation for you to come by my house each and every day and dump trash. Is that a reasonable accommodation? You come to my house every day, dump my trash, because I can't. And basically what they say, well, I don't know, we can't do that, but what can we do? Well, we can either ask at one of those side bins, right, that the door opens up on the side. That way the kids can even make the trash can. And it's not just about me and my fingers. Anyone can make the trash can. And that's an easy adjustment. So sometimes it's the resolution isn't always apparent if it's something you feel like you can't do, but you just know that people have rights under the Fair Housing Act. And yes, I will share this PowerPoint. I am a big sharer, a bunch of documentation to help support what you're doing. Yes, the law is really clear, and the big thing that you got to say is you have a resource, if you didn't know already, where you can get some information. All right. Any questions about reasonable accommodations, modifications?
This might be time now to circle back to the limited belongings policy.
Okay.
So the initial question was there about the policy that's in place at the shelter. And then Julia added in that they have a policy like that as well. People are only allowed enough belongings to fit in specific containers that are provided, armoire and footlocker. We do this for fire and fall hazard reasons. And then Kara came back with, we give each person a container to put their things in and a container for the household. We also provide many items. We also allow a pillowcase of children's toys. And so the original question was whether those policies are allowable.
Well, answer the question, yes. I would say yes. But one of the things that would help, there's a couple of mantras that I give people that kind of help. But one thing to think about this is, when you give them these containers and these things, is that helping them? Yes. Is that adverse against anyone else? No. You're treating it the same. You're giving everyone the same. Is it a bad thing? No. So everything that you described, I can't, and especially now with COVID-19, to keep everything kind of concealed and compact, I would say is definitely the reason that you do it. But when you look back, what is the business reason for this rule? If you can tell me what a business reason for this rule is that's describable and makes sense, then I don't see why you couldn't defend that anytime it's challenged. Then for people to step up and say, why do you only need one container? This is what we do for everyone. This is the space that we have. We do this for business reason of whatever it is, right? So that makes sense. So if you can always talk to what's the business reason for that rule, and I challenge everybody, question your rules, because sometimes they're outdated. They haven't caught up. Like Section 8 used to, or Housing Choice Voucher, used to base the number of bedrooms based on kids and ages. But they've kind of adapted that because familial status says you got to be careful there. So things change as we go along, because even with children, they weren't protected until 88, but there was a lot of rules prior to that. So always challenge your rules, kind of look at them from a perspective of, is this creating any harm? What is the business reason for this? And if it makes sense, then I would say so far it makes sense to me too.
And I think she added in the chat that she asked the question because you spoke of hoarders, and she wanted to make sure that that wasn't in violation of the hoarder protections. No,
hoarding, until I thought I was kind of a hoarder until I saw that show, Hoarding. Have you guys seen that show, Hoarding? I haven't seen it in a long time, but then I thought, I am definitely not a hoarder. I have stuff, but I'm not a hoarder. So a hoarding isn't just a container that when I'm talking hoarding, I'm talking about they go in and it's a health and safety factor. There are boxes from floor to ceiling. There are papers on the stove. There are, I don't know, can you help me out describing what you guys have seen on the hoarding shows? You could barely walk in anywhere. There's just, too much. So yes, I think the way that you're helping people with their belongings sounds, from my perspective, and I think I'm a reasonable person, sounds good to me.
We have a question from Letty. Can homeless shelters deny support animals?
It depends on the shelter. Again, if it's a transient shelter, meaning that you bring your stuff with you and you leave your stuff with you, then that's transient, and sometimes fair housing does apply. But this is where the ADA would apply. So it depends. To me, I'd look at that and say, what kind of animal is it? Because now if ADA is going to apply, it's got to be a dog or a mid-sized horse. The other thing is, some of the shelters I know, they don't have the capacity to deal with the animals. So I would say it could be an FHA, Fair Housing Act issue, and it could be an ADA issue, especially if it's transient shelters or housing. I hope that helps. Thank you. Any other particular questions you might be wondering about? Doesn't necessarily, if we've exhausted animals, that's fine too. Since I want to be respectful of our time too. But if there's anything else that you guys have been wondering about, I know there's a whole 45-minute talk that I do about the use of criminal records in housing. If you're working with advocates who have criminal involvement with the criminal justice system, I do a whole 45-minute class on that. If that's something, tell Linda too, because we're always happy to partner with the coalition. I mean, we've been partners even before their name changes. So we're happy to do that at any time. Any more questions that you might have, or should I give you back part of your day?
You're also welcome to just stick around and chat if you'd like to ask questions of Cheri, but the formal part of her information sharing is over, so I'm going to stop the recording.